Canada could well be the world's first meme country. Just last week, its Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's performance on a state visit to India has not only been a catastrophe, but a disgrace to all substitute drama teachers worldwide. And it's also made the country a global laughingstock. It is this Prime Minister, who likes to play dress-up, that has continually called Canada the world's first post-national country and has pushed for more than 1 million more people to arrive in that country over the next 3 years at a cost to taxpayers of a paltry sum of $440 million. In fact, the Prime Minister has recently said that the largest complaint that Canadians have is not about unemployment, housing costs, wait times at hospitals. No, Justin Trudeau has said the largest concern Canadians have is that there's not enough immigration. Canadians want more, he says. As Canada quickly abolishes itself, rewrites and erases much of its history and becomes little more than a work camp for all of the world that wants to come, and with no other purpose than to grow GDP, a funny thing happened recently. That a long-hidden report by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the Canadian Security Intelligence Service has surfaced, in which they warned the government 20 years ago about threats to the country that have now come to fruition. And it will come as no surprise as this presentation continues. In the 1990s, Canada opened the floodgates for all of the world and embarked on a civilization experiment that was never debated upon, nor was it ever asked of Canadians if they wished to abolish themselves, the Western character of their culture and country, and transform themselves into a nation made up of a patchwork of tribes with very little in common with each other. In fact, in Canada, segregation by community has become the norm, and unlike in many other parts of the world, this is by decision and is the conscious choice of those made who are arriving. As the Canadian government never fails to virtue signal on the country's precious and self-deluded multicultural mosaic, it has all but morphed into a series of monocultural neighborhoods across the country. The radical transformation of Canada is well underway, and it would seem that at this point it no longer matters. There's no going back. By 2036, StatCan predicts that as many as 30% of all residents will not have been born in Canada, with another 20% being native-born but at least having one immigrant parent. And since the vast majority of immigrants come from Asia or Pacific nations, within less than 20 years, Canada will likely be as brown as it is white. There is no historical example that I'm aware of where a people or nation in peacetime willingly replace themselves and their culture for ideological reasons. And as Canada becomes ever more diverse, more authoritarian measures are needed to control groups of disparate people and cultures living in close proximity. While the Parliament discusses ways to further control what you can see, read, and say on social media, in yet another affront on a person's ability to speak their conscience, the Supreme Court of Canada has ruled that truth is no defense, in that it is impermissible even to state demonstrable facts if, in the authorities' estimation, those facts might spark enmity toward a group. Let me say that again. Truth is no defense in Canada. With the growing lack of social cohesion, the government thought it would be wise to pander to one of social justice's most ardent crusade. In the recent 2018 budget, a 369-page document, 11 of which were title pages and tables of content, the word gender is mentioned 359 times, or basically once for every page. And it is into this utopian nation currently coalescing around the sacred tenets of cultural Marxism that, in this magical world being built by Trudeau and those in the political and government bureaucracy, you have a country that is literally being bought up from underneath the country's citizens. Dirty Hong Kong and Chinese money has been flowing into Canada for decades. The country's real estate market is world-renowned as a place to launder ill-gotten wealth. While your average leaf drunk on binge-watching NHL while downing a double-double and munching on Timbits has no clue, the open secret is that Canada is a massive haven for tax fraud. In fact, Canada doesn't just tolerate tax evasion, it legalized it. The Canadian government has been creating legal and banking frameworks to encourage it. Put simply, Canada is built for tax evasion, and international tax evaders, both individual and organizations, are using Canada to avoid taxation in their countries of origin. And to avoid scrutiny when moving large sums of money, they use soft assets like homes and land that do not have fixed trade values. The sloshing of dirty money as well as other factors have combined to create a crisis of affordability and availability of homes in Canadian cities. Interestingly, though, none of this is news, and it was foreseen by both the RCMP and CSIS, who warned the government back in 1997 and also accused the Chinese government of purchasing real estate in Canadian urban centers as a method of threatening Canada. But I, like you, had never heard about this because the recommendations from the former classified program called Sidewinder were abandoned. All documents were ordered destroyed and buried in 1997 by the Liberal government as they were anxious to build ties with China and didn't want to upset them. And despite the RCMP and the National Spy Services advising the government that the current mess would befall the domestic real estate market, the government did nothing, and now we're in a situation where a great number of first-time buyers are virtually locked out of the property market. The report, incidentally, was titled Chinese Intelligence Services and Triad's Financial Links in Canada and was a joint RCMP-CSIS task force that came to the conclusion that the Chinese government was using legal and legitimate businesses to gain control over the economic levers of Canada. It warned that because the Canadian economy was concentrated in 3 urban centers, that it was more vulnerable than other countries because of the many legislative loopholes governing finance and the concentration of financial power in a few hands. The report was also clear when it stated, if you look at a single individual, the threat does not seem to be there, but because of their associations and their alliances with China, the facts analyzed lead us to believe that a gain of influence is the objective of a concerted plan and that could constitute a threat to Canada. Moreover, the report concluded that China remains one of the greatest ongoing threats to Canada's national security and Canadian industry. And what do you know? By sheer coincidence, the government of the People's Republic of China has recently seized billions of dollars worth of Canadian real estate from Anbang, which is one of China's largest overseas buyers. Canada, as usual, in its mad rush to abolish itself, didn't pay heed to the US government when it flat out called Anbang a state-owned entity. While it never presented proof of the Chinese government's collusion with that company, it's now ironically under state control and in control of billions in Canadian real estate. Canada is one of the few countries in the world where people pay more in taxes than companies, and via its status as a tax haven, dirty money, especially from China, has created a situation where the Canadian real estate market is among the most inflated in the world, and the amount of personal debt Canadians hold is at record highs. The country is being bought out from underneath its citizens' feet, and in less than 20 years, Canada will no longer be a Western nation. There are, of course, vested interests in finance, NGOs, real estate, and the governmental sectors that have interests to ride this nation-wrecking gravy train that Canada has set itself upon. But with the collapsing middle class and the growing loss of social cohesion and unity, these problems look set to intensify. And the man they elected to lead them, Justin Trudeau, believes that the biggest concern of the Canadian people is that there's not enough immigration. It's quite ironically the cherry on top of the ludicrous and simply maniacal situation that Canadians have created for themselves. For a more thorough look at the current situation in Canada, please check out the best-selling book, Canada in Decay, Mass Immigration, Diversity, and the Ethnocide of Euro-Canadians. Links are in the description. This is the first scholarly book I know of that questions the undemocratic policy of mass immigration. As always, thanks for watching. If you like this kind of material, please consider subscribing. Also, find me on the usual social media. Till next time.